Okay, so just a little background on this case to get started. This child's body was found in central Germany in the summer, and it was found when an eviction notice was being served to a 20-year-old woman who was a frequent heroin user and prostitute who often left the child unattended. Um, the father, incidentally, was serving a prison sentence at the time for theft. So neighbors had previously contacted social workers after noticing this child being left alone. But after visiting, they did not feel the child was in immediate danger, and so they had allowed him to stay with his mother. I wanted to talk a bit about the environment in which this body was discovered because this is obviously going to play a key role in the rate of colonization. Uh, so this case occurred during summer season. It was a mild summer, so the temperatures during this week in which the body was discovered ranged from between 50 to 76 degrees, and the doors and windows to the apartment were all observed by the investigators to be firmly shut, restricting access of insects from the outside to the inside, getting to the body. Venetian blinds in the child's room where the body was discovered were also found to be closed, and I mention this because there have been several studies that indicate that direct sunlight inhibits the growth and rate of larval masses and accelerates their development. And also, while the apartment was dirty from an entomology standpoint, it was rather clean. And this is important because researchers have to consider whether or not these flies or insects that are colonizing the body were already present in the apartment, or if they have to account for extra time it would take to get there from the outside. So this case had a number of legal considerations and charges associated with it. While the mother was being charged with the death of her child for manslaughter or negligent homicide, investigators were also considering charging the social workers for duty of care violations. So these were the ones who had visited the apartment previously and had deemed that the child had not been at risk. So in order to determine if this was the case, investigators needed to establish not only when death had occurred, but how long the child had been left alone for before death. So the body itself was discovered in the late fresh pre-bloat phase, and the autopsy revealed signs of malnourishment. The child was approximately 14, 15 pounds when the mean average for his age was about 23, and the autopsy also indicated extended post-mortem interval in that there was partial mummification and a discoloration of the skin with some skin slippage. Now, I'm going to show some images, but I wanted to warn that they are somewhat graphic, and I know this is forensic entomology, but keep in mind that this is a child that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so this is how the child was discovered. You can see he's fairly malnourished, and due to the state of decay, forensic pathologists doing the autopsy estimated a post-mortem interval of about between 7 and 10 days here. So maggots were collected from both the face and the anal genital area of the corpse. Maggots were killed by placing them in hot water before moving them to a 70% ethanol solution to be shipped to entomologists. And they also provided these entomologists with crime scene videos and photographs of the scene. So regarding some of the methods that were used here, the larvae were identified through the application of the dichotomous key to the mouthparts and external morphological features of these insects. The developmental stages were estimated through comparing observations to related entomology publications dealing with Diptera life cycles and forensics. And finally, during this process, sodium hydroxide was used to brighten the skin of the maggots and make the identification features stand out under the microscope. And if you see here to the right, I attached an image of a little reminder to walk you through the life cycle, developmental stages of a common blowfly. Now, turning our attention to the findings of these researchers, the maggots represented 3 separate species of flies that were recovered from this body. The genital anal area contained larvae of Muscina stabulans, which is the false stable fly, as well as Phaenia canicularis, which is the little house fly. However, the maggots recovered from the face were identified as Calophora vomitoria, and these are the blue bottle flies. However, the expected larva of the Lucilia, the common green bottle fly, was observed to be absent from the crime scene, and we'll see why this is all important a little bit later. I want to review some of the important characteristics of these fly species relevant to this case. Muscina stabulans and Phaenia canicularis are both strongly attracted to feces, but stabulans is less attracted in feces that are associated with corpses when they defecate upon death. Colonization of canicularis usually begins 3 to 10 days post-mortem. Now this is different from the maggots that were recovered from the face. Calophora vomitoria is usually an early inhabitant of cadavers and is among the first to arrive. And canicularis are known to prefer living indoors when conditions outside are cooler. And on the right here, I just have a few images for reference. So a lot of the evidence in this case was based on discrepancies between the different rates of larval development between these fly species. Given the average temperature of this time period, the colonization rate for Calophora vomitoria suggested a post-mortem interval of between 6 and 7 days. However, conditions in larval development of the stabulan species suggested a post-mortem interval of about twice this long, approximately 14 days. Also, the absence of Lucilia was thought to be due to a lack of access to the sealed environment, suggesting that stabulans and vomitoria species were already present. And I do have a few images that I wanted us to look at, but again, I wanted to warn that these are graphic in nature. Now, these images are the two separate areas in the body from which maggots were recovered from. It's a little difficult to see what's going on here, but on the left, the child's face from which the calophorids were recovered, you don't really see a whole lot of insect activity, whereas on the right, the other species of flies are on a more advanced stage of development and colonization. So what does all of this mean? The results from this were that it was determined that the more recent colonization of Calophora vomitoria on the victim's face took place after death, approximately 6 to 8 days before the body was ever discovered. However, the more established colonization of the canicularis and stabulans likely started approximately 14 days or more before the body was discovered. This means that the anal genital area wasn't cleaned for over a week before death occurred, and maggots had already set in, suggesting neglect. So I wanted to end this presentation with a look at how all this evidence was used in the legal proceedings that followed. The mother was sentenced to 5 years in prison for negligent homicide, and in making his decision, the judge used the evidence to establish not only neglect, but how long the child had suffered before dying, and he had factored this into his ruling and sentencing. And as of the writing of this article, proceedings with the social workers were still being sorted out, although one line of charges had been dropped. And so this concludes my presentation on child neglect and forensic entomology, and I wanted to thank you all for your time and attention.